Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Conventional Wisdom Podcast, where we discuss ideas, uncover truth to gain wisdom. I'm Samuel Vernon. Welcome to episode 1. I thought it would be appropriate to start this podcast by discussing wisdom. After all, this is the Conventional Wisdom Podcast, so we should have a general idea of what it is and why is it important. But I think wisdom is one of those words that most people in today's society either have a misconception about or they don't care about it entirely. It doesn't really enter their lives or their thought process all that much. But I think that's so wrong. I think it's fundamental to so many aspects of our life that we ought to understand it properly. Now, before I get too deep into this episode, I want to take a step back and discuss this podcast in general. Where do I see it going and why I started it? It all started to just clarify my own thoughts on various topics, really organize my ideas, and present them clearly such that, number one, they're clear to me and I understand my own thoughts. But number two, I could hopefully clarify my reasoning and where I come from to other people. And I think that's pretty helpful. I think a lot of people have ideas in their heads that they maybe haven't thought through or they got from somebody else and they don't really understand the origin of that idea and why it's necessary to have or not necessary. So I really just want to take some deep ideas. And when I say deep, I mean important ideas in our lives. For example, this is a random example, but anyways, fear, right? So fear is a natural part of our lives, but you could think through it a little bit deeper and say, well, what's necessary to fear and what's not necessary? Is there things that are appropriate? That's one question. Is there necessary fear or unnecessary fear? But then a broader question might be, should there be? So by looking at that, at least, you can get an understanding of, oh, maybe I should be afraid of this or I shouldn't be afraid of that. And it might orient your life a little bit differently. Anyways, that's just one small example, but I want to take these topics one by one, dive into them, and clarify them for my benefit and for the listeners, and hopefully some idea I have makes some sense to somebody out there and the world gets a little bit better. Because quite honestly, the world is pretty crazy, and there are so many ideas out there that are not thought through and dangerous, I think. So hopefully this podcast can serve as a mirror to sort of reflect our own thinking on some important topics. So today I want to talk to you about wisdom and what I think it means. Now, I'm not the arbiter of truth when it comes to defining words, so I can only present my ideas and they either make sense or don't to you. But this started a few years ago when I tried to come up with a working definition of wisdom such that you couldn't slip in another word to fit that same definition. At least colloquially, you couldn't. So I think I defined it, as most of you probably would, as either some type of deep insight on something, probably some useful information that you have gained through experience. And at the beginning, you can be satisfied with that definition, but it doesn't stand up to further thought. And this is what I mean. So if you think that wisdom is just knowledge gained from experience, well, that means that you cannot gain wisdom by either reading a book by another wise person or listening to another wise person. That means you can only get it through your personal experiences. Well, then that means that there's tons of wisdom out there that I'll never have because I'll never go through it. So I think that definition is close, but we're not quite there. You might also think that wisdom is some sort of practical application of knowledge either gained from experience or learned. But that also runs into an issue with how are you applying that information. So here's an example. Is it wise to cheat on a test? Now, most of us would say obviously it's not wise to cheat on a test. But if we're going with that definition of some sort of practical application of knowledge, then you could say, well, I know that this test is super important. I know that passing it will get me, a passing grade, which will then allow me to apply to better college, which will open the door to further career steps. So you can easily rationalize how cheating on an exam can benefit you in the long run, and especially if you don't get caught. Now, here's where the past experience might come in. You might know, let's say, the layout of the classroom, the habits of the teacher, the blind spots of everything, and where exactly to hide your notes. You'll know that you won't get caught. So, is it wise to cheat on a test knowing that you'll get into a better college and have better career choices in the future, and you know you'll get away with it now? Does that mean that it's wise? Well, I would argue no, obviously. It's still not wise to cheat on the test, even though it's very practical. You can argue that it's extremely practical to cheat on this exam and eventually make my way into a better college where doors are open all around me for my future. But nobody would seriously consider that decision as being wise. So that definition cannot possibly be the case. You could say that maybe it's useful to cheat on a test. It might be beneficial for your financial future to cheat on a test, but it's certainly not wise. So there has to be some sort of distinction between wise and these utilitarian terms, practical or useful or something like that. So the conclusion that I came to when I wanted to figure out a good working definition of wisdom, and it's certainly not fully formed. I mean, I think to properly define all the terms needed to define wisdom, we would need several episodes. But for now, at least my working definition, you need something beyond the experiential aspect, meaning, again, you can't gain wisdom simply by listening to somebody. You only can gain it by your personal experience. I don't accept that. And then I also don't accept that it's just a purely useful form of information, because you can use that information for something else, something that's not considered wise. So what I came to is that it has to have a good element to it. And what I mean by that is whatever information that you've got and that you're sort of applying, it has to be towards the good. So it's not wise to cheat on a test because it's not good to lie to yourself, to lie to the exams, to hurt your future by such a lie. It's better to test your knowledge, better to figure out your weak spots, and then make yourself better through hard work and study, and not to just skip a test or cut some corners. And that's the wise decision. Wisdom has a good element to it that's a bit deeper than just something beneficial in the short term or a smart decision or something like that. For wisdom to mean anything, for it to be distinct from smart or useful, there has to be something good to it. And you can put your own definition of good here. It doesn't have to be my definition. Now, I do believe that there's an objectivity to good, but we'll get into that in further podcasts. But for now, use your own definition for various things. What do you think would be a good decision? And really kind of think through what that good might mean to you. So here's an example. We talked about what wisdom is not, but I think most of us would agree, or at least have heard a wise saying about something along the lines of investing your money. Taking something that you have, putting it off to the side and for use of later. And especially when it comes to investing, that's something that you put off to the side will grow and be more valuable in the future than it is now. It doesn't have to be exactly about money, but I think most people have heard some type of wise investment or something like that. Okay, so why is that considered wise and not smart? Because it certainly is a smart decision to invest your money. Well, it's smart because you'll have more money in the future, but it's wise because you're making a sacrifice. And sacrifices are a part of life. They just are. Everywhere you go, almost every day, you're making sacrifices. You're giving up. If you don't think you're giving up anything materially, then you're giving up your time and your energy to do something now to hopefully gain something in the future. And therefore, you almost by definition, by engaging in sacrifice, you are trying to better your future, hopefully for yourself and even further to your community around you. So sacrifices are inherently a part of life and very necessary for a good one. So let me just take a surface level example, because you might ask yourself, why is sacrifices good? Or maybe, not all sacrifices could be good. But let me just give you a simple example. Think of any hero, your favorite superhero, or when you were a kid, any comic book hero. Did they ever sacrifice something? Almost all of them did. Actually, I can't even think of one that didn't sacrifice something. It comes with being a hero, with doing the good, is making those sacrifices. And conversely, the villains, or the evil people, they didn't seem to make a whole lot of sacrifices. In fact, they took from other people. So they kind of forced other people to make sacrifices on their behalf. So anyway, that's just a surface level sort of exploration into why the sacrifice is part of the good. Thus, the wise investor would be, investing his money, sacrificing what he has now for future gain. Okay, so let's just say you believe me. You say, all right, I get it. Your definition is that wisdom is just application of knowledge for the good. There's a good element to it, but how does that really affect me? What does that even matter? I mean, I've lived my entire life perfectly well without your stupid definition of wisdom, so why do I need it? Well, I tried to distinguish a smart or a useful decision with plenty of information and knowledge from a wise decision with that same information and knowledge. One of them has to do with the good. So you can be the smartest person in your field, head of your class, but you can also use all that information for horrible things. But you can't use all that information making wise decisions and be a horrible person. Almost by definition. You make wise decisions with all your information, and not only are you advancing the good for yourself, but you're advancing the good for the rest of the world. So, in my head, what could be more important than that? Where would you rather live? In a world where everyone was primarily concerned with making wise decisions, or primarily concerned with making smart decisions? You might say, well, it's good to have smart decisions and have smart people. And I completely agree with you. Yes, that there is benefit in being smart, 100%. But there's benefit in owning a hammer. You can use it to build a house, but you can also use it to dismantle one. A knife could be used to stab someone, or it could be used for surgery or in a chef's kitchen. I mean, knowledge and being smart is just a toolkit, but wisdom is applying that toolkit for the good. Anyways, I hope that's clear. I've probably rambled on a bit too long about wisdom, but I wanted to stress my point. I wanted to introduce this idea of wisdom because certainly this theme will be present throughout all of my episodes, at least I hope so. I would love to present each episode with some idea that and talk about them and maybe ask certain questions on them such that perhaps you think about them a second time, come to understand something that you didn't already understand about it. And hopefully through all of this, yes, we can obviously become more wise. But primarily, I want these podcasts to help clarify ideas. That's my main concern. So I want to thank you for joining me on this episode 1. This was a feat for me to create. This is my very first podcast that I've ever done. I've never done something like this. So it definitely was a challenge for me, but I enjoyed doing it. I'll continue to do them, and I hope you will join me for the next one. So I really appreciate you being here, and we'll see you next time.